2012. So earlier, you're an environmental attorney and has been the former chairman of the San Diego Unified Port District. And I guess, what's the title now of it's the Climate Action? You're the head of the Climate Action?
Head of the Climate Task Force.
Climate Task Force for the Democrats in Congress. So he's Representative Peters is also a member of the House Judiciary Committee and the Armed Services Committee, and has been a wonderful advocate for things that Scripps cares about on the climate side, but also our sort of interactions with the military. It's quite important in San Diego for us. And so we're just pleased to have him here today, and I don't know, I'll turn it over to you.
Can you hear me in the back there?
Yeah.
All right, let's go without the microphone. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the chance to be here. This is a real treasure in our region, Scripps Oceanography. I'm really proud of what you do, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I'm trying to work that into our service in Congress. I'm starting my second term. I don't know if you know that I ran for re-election. Did anyone here? Sorry about your TV viewing in the fall, but I'm now in my second term. I've tried to build my service around San Diego, which is driven by tourism, the military, and science and innovation. So on the science side, you think about our economy. Qualcomm's our largest private employer. We're the second or third leading biotechnology center in the country. We're second by number of scientists, third by the amount of money. We have a big military technology sector, so a lot of people are developing technologies that can be used in the battlefield because they've been engineers at Spay Wars or something like that, and a lot of that innovation is happening here. And we have a big clean technology presence. We're big solar employers. We have I don't know if you know, we have the largest per capita use of electric vehicles in the country. We are here at the Center of Algae Research, which might someday be a feedstock for biofuels. And we're also a center of smart grid research, and UCSD in particular has been one of the institutions that's worked on this. But our utility, SDG&E, is actually pretty progressive on figuring out how to make the grid both more efficient and more secure. And so that's a big part of our economy. So I signed up for the Armed Services Committee my first time. I signed up for the Science Committee in my first term. And we call it the Science Committee with air quotes, because a lot of the scientists that come in would get lectured by some of the, frankly, the Republicans who didn't like what they heard about climate change. And this, I made a point of pursuing three basic things. One is funding for basic scientific research. We have a lead in science in the world. Most of the great scientists who are my age are in the United States, but we face competition. And today, a lot of the scientists that are your age don't have to stay in the United States to do your science. There's other countries that are investing, stealing from our playbook. And if we don't pay attention to investing in basic scientific research, people will go to other places. They'll go to Singapore, they'll go to China, Brazil, England, and we will lose that lead we have in science. And I often say to people who think about that, is, how would you feel if the next Google were a Russian company? You wouldn't like that. And so we don't want that to happen. We also have to fix the immigration policy that tends to send the people we've educated back to their home countries. When we're in a competition for talent, we want all the most talented people to be here, both in the United States and in San Diego. So that's been one area. Second, I focused heavily on veterans. We have the largest, or the third largest veterans population in the country, the largest homeless veterans population. I've done a lot of work on trying to make sure that they transition well and that we support them. I could talk about that more if you want. And then the third area is energy in the military. Gabby Giffords on the Armed Services Committee used to work on alternative energy in the military, and there's been a lot of promise in that area. The Navy wants to invest in advanced biofuels. As I said, one of the feedstocks for that could be algae. The biggest proponent of solar energy that I met in the United States Capitol wasn't from the Sierra Club, it was the Commandant of the Marines, who's found a number of ways to use solar technologies in the battlefield that are just better for the warfighter than petroleum. Because one of the most dangerous things we do in the battlefield is move large amounts of petroleum from one place to another. When those convoys are attacked, we lose soldiers and Marines, and as a consequence, we spend a lot of effort and money protecting those convoys when we should be focusing on the mission. So the Commandant told me he's powering his bunkers with solar panels. He's got solar panels on backpacks to power small appliances. Someday he wants to do desalination with solar panels. We don't have that yet. But a relatively small investment in basic research by the military in a big military budget could lead to huge commercial implications. Now, I had a little bit of a setback in some of that because now that the Senate's changed, the new people in charge of armed services are not big proponents of biofuels. So I don't think that that's going to move ahead very much in the next couple of years. But I think the solar side will, and we'll do a lot of energy efficiency stuff. We'll keep working on that in armed services. I'm the chair of the Democrats' task force on climate. I read an article in the New York Times, an op-ed by a guy named Ramanathan. Anyone heard of him? And I said, I know this guy, and I read it, made a lot of sense about short-lived climate pollutants. We brought Dr. Ram out to Washington, D.C. I introduced a bill on we would call super pollutants, a term that the president has adopted without attributing it to us. But we're happy that we're talking about it. These are methane, black carbon, hydrofluorocarbons, things that don't persist as long in the environment as carbon dioxide, but are much more, might have much more an impact in the short run. So if we could change the emissions there, we could have a big effect on the rate of climate change just today. So that bill has not gotten anywhere because, frankly, it's an explicitly climate-related bill, and that's just bad politics right now. And I consider myself a very moderate Democrat. I'm one of the 5 Democrats who got endorsed by the Chamber of Commerce. So I'm willing to work with them on tax policy. I want to fix the health care law and make it work. But they're really wrong on 2 things in the Republican Party, just absolutely wrong. One is on voter suppression, which drives me crazy. Why we wouldn't want everyone to vote just drives me crazy. And the other is climate. The notion that we should not be listening to scientists about climate is just preposterously bad. And so I'm a pretty partisan on those 2 issues. I've got a bill on resiliency. It's called the STRONG Act, strengthening the resiliency of our communities on the ground. Everything's got to have an acronym. That's a pretty good one. And the idea is that if we can provide, I think this will have some bipartisan support because we don't have to argue about why extreme weather is happening. But we've seen that we spent $60 billion right after we got into office last time on Hurricane Sandy off budget. So the Republicans and the Democrats understand that if you equip the communities to be prepared for extreme weather, we think the ratio is for every dollar you spend in preparedness, you save $4 on cleanup, whether it's FEMA, the insurance company, the family, or the small business. So people understand that, and that's got some bipartisan support. I think we might move some of that adaptation stuff this year. And then the third thing I told you about is energy in the military. I'd be interested in hearing your questions. I'll just tell you that, as I said, for some reason climate has become a very politicized thing. But I will tell you, too, that I think that there's reasons to believe that we will have those discussions and that they're unavoidable because a lot of these inputs are coming that are we really can't ignore. One is the infrastructure needs for water storage. We were just talking about this with some of the faculty. The patterns of rainfall will be different enough that we're going to have to think about a new way to store water. The Sierras just won't cut it. Obviously, we know the Delta's in trouble, and so people are going to start paying attention to that. The Navy is discussing the fact that it has to cover a lot more territory because the polar ice is melting. So, we all would like to see the military budget go down, and they're saying, you're giving us a lot more area to patrol, and now we have to worry about Russia coming across the top. So that's an input. The insurance companies don't want to pay for flooding on the coastline. They want to charge more. And so there are a lot of reasons to think that we'll have these discussions. Not because Democrats are arguing about them or even because university professors are coming to talk to the science committee, but because the private sector knows that they're data-driven and they know what's really happening. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about policy, about politics, about Nancy Pelosi or Michelle Bachmann or anybody, any personalities. Any questions, sir?
So when like a James Inhofe or someone like that hears that the Marines are very into solar power, does that sway him at all, in your opinion? Or how does he perceive it?
Well, I think the question is, you know, what does Senator Inhofe, who's one of the major climate deniers in the whole Congress, think about the Marines using solar power? They'll support it because it's for the warfighter, right? And you know, we in the Science Committee, we had the Secretary of Energy come in and get lectured by, you know, one of the Republicans. He started out something like, well, I'm from Long Beach State and you're from MIT, but here's how I see it. By the way, talking about seasonal variability, this was his, you'll appreciate this, I might as well tell you what he said. He said, in 1910, there was a storm just as bad as Hurricane Sandy. So there you go, it's not changing. So I think most people get an F in this institution for writing that answer. But it's hard for them to say no to the commandant. So again, it's not explicitly climate related, but what if we did invest enough to figure out how to do desalination from solar? That could have a big impact, you know, around the world. Anybody up there? No?
Congress spends thousands of dollars a year on car leases, gym memberships, perks for the congressmen. Should taxpayers be responsible for funding these programs when we're in such a high deficit?
I'm not sure quite what you're talking about in terms of perks. I mean, personally, I turned down the health care, I turned down the pension, and I'm not there to try to make money, but if you have particular things you thought we should be dealing with, I'd be happy to talk about that.
Just a general question.
Yeah. I think I've heard Congress members complain that they're not well compensated. I don't believe that. But if there's particular things you want to talk about, you know, give us a holler. Yes.
I hope I get this right, but we're reading about the federal tax credit for solar expiring in 2016, and do you have a prediction of how this is going to go? If it's going to get extended so people can get, you know, a break for buying an electric car or personal solar on their house?
I hadn't heard about the electric cars incentives expiring. Some of those are state-driven, and California's been pretty consistently pro. The thing about the tax incentives in general is that they need to be longer term to get people to invest. So what you do when you give a one-year tax incentive, or we just extended tax incentives retroactively. Well, that's never going to incentivize someone to invest in the future. And so one of the problems in our party that we don't understand is we really need tax incentives that last out 5 years or so. So if you want to induce someone to invest in wind, you've got to give them a tax break in the future over some period of time, especially when you think of the permitting process might be 18 months. So that's the battle I'm facing. Right now, I think that there's not a lot of interest in incentivizing alternative energy. At the same time, we're maintaining the breaks we're giving fossil fuel energy, which doesn't make sense to me because they seem to be figuring it out pretty well without the incentives. Ma'am?
So you mentioned coastal resiliency and the whole climate. Do you have any advice, or you also mentioned the insurance aspect of it, but is there anything else for us that go on the Hill that we can really sell the notion of coastal resiliency? That was the plus up through the NOAA budget, right? They did get an increase for tackling coastal resiliency. And I'm just wondering if you could expand upon that anymore.
Are you talking about at a federal level?
Yeah.
Well, I think the pressure point has been the need for insurance, and you know, so it's really starting to raise the question of, you know, should we rebuild in these places or should we be building differently? And that's going on. What I would say that actually the more productive thing to do is focus on the laboratories that exist in localities. So one of the things, I was chair of the climate initiative at the San Diego Foundation. Scripps did the research for that, the 2050 report. That was before I was the chair. And so the big impacts here are sea level rise, drought, and more intense wildfires. So we got the local institutions to start to think about that, and that was very, very helpful. You're very, you're not dismissed locally. People really listen to what you have to say. We have the best climate scientists in the world here, and so that's been really useful. And the work that's happened at the Port Commission, where I was the chairman, we started an effort. One of the commissioners was very concerned that if we put out these maps showing all this inundation, that property values would go down. Well, we didn't think that was the right response, So we had more of a discussion about how to build differently, where to build, and what the effects were on habitat. And I think right now, to be honest with you, you could get a lot of, you could get a flat head from banging your head on the federal wall. There's a lot of opportunities at the state level, particularly in California and locally. So, Brett, how are you?
As far as the port's concerned,
Yeah.
and the harbor, I'm concerned about the use. I think the idea of, for instance, putting something like a football stadium close to the harbor prevents future use of the harbor for boats, for research vessels, pleasure vessels, commercial. But I just feel like the whole harbor is getting attacked from all different directions, from real estate people especially.
That's a
Like
national phenomenon, and you'll find that, we talked about a downtown stadium. I'm kind of sympathetic to a stadium, but not in a way that would displace water uses. So the paper initially had an idea of putting it really almost literally underwater, which presented interesting engineering things anyway. So now I think the talk has moved to putting it more inland where the bus yard is over across from Father Joe's. So it would be a little bit different. There's still a question about whether that's the best place, but I agree. There's always an interest in among the real estate community in displacing these water-based uses. And I always said, you can build a stadium in El Cajon, but you can't have a port there. So I agree with you, and I would just keep an eye on that. But generally, I think we'll be okay in terms of protecting the terminals, the marine terminals. Not that much, they're not that big anyway. Ray?
I wanted to ask you a question about nuclear power. I happen to believe that we are giving it short shrift at the moment, and that our response to Fukushima was not intelligent.
Are you suggesting that Washington didn't respond with rationality?
Of course. But now that, I'm trying to see a silver lining in what I regard as a cloud. The shift of the control of the Congress to the Republicans on both sides. How do you think nuclear will fare with respect to that future?
Well, President Obama was already, we should talk more about it, because I read The Economist article that said that nuclear power was dead. For two reasons. One is that of the Fukushima, the inability to control safety, and two was the high demand for public subsidies. So we should talk more about it. But I would say, for President Obama's perspective, he's got this all of the above energy strategy that includes nuclear. And also say that I've talked to people around here, even in General Atomics, who think that they have a much more efficient way to deal with nuclear power that's going to effectively burn up all the waste, so you don't generate as much waste. So I thought that people were open to it. I thought Secretary Moniz was open to it. Certainly the Republicans are open to it. And I guess I hadn't thought that there was a great slowing because of the Democrats in Congress.
Well, I don't know if it's the Democrats. There's a great slowing because of fear of things that you can only measure with fancy counters.
Yeah.
Coming across the Pacific Ocean.
Well, I think that there's a fear. That was the reaction in Japan too, by the way. But I think I would be interested in maybe sitting down with you and talking more about the market side of it too, whether you thought that had an effect on it.
First of all, thanks for coming here today. It's really nice to be able to have this kind of interaction. And there's a kind of a sense among a lot of people in the research community that there's a growing sort of anti-science atmosphere, both in the general public and also in Congress. See someone like Ted Cruz elected to the chair of the Space and Technology committee, and it's, you know, it's something that's really, really concerning for a lot of people. And I'm just wondering how you see Congress's role in responding to that, or whether it's science education, or I guess how you see the future of that.
Well, I think it's an astute observation. I think it's true, and I think even to the extent there's disagreement within the Republican conference, it's not that there's no nuance coming through in the policy. It's really we're at a really fundamental time, because if we're going to compete, it's going to be in science, technology, engineering, math. And then we talk about setting national standards, even like what every student should learn. There's controversy over that, right? So I think it is a real problem. I would just suggest to you that again, the private sector is going to play a role in making sure that we don't really get too stupid as a nation, because there's an interest in education among the private sector. And I think you all should play a role as well. And make sure that there are. I think that there's some safe outcomes for safe policy outcomes from this discussion, and people don't also think that they don't need to think we're going to shut down the oil and gas industry. That's not going to happen. But we are going to have to make some changes in how we power the country and how we work with the grid, and that can be an exciting opportunity. It's one where the nation can lead and not find itself way behind. So that's what I'll try to work on. I got one more, sir.
There's a lot of confusion and misinformation, I think, in the country on the issue of fracking.
Yeah.
And would suggest that one way to help solve that problem would be to ask the National Academy of Sciences to do a study on that particular thing to reduce some of this confusion. And they've had a very hard time with Congress getting funding to do such a study, but it would be, I think, of a great service to the community in general.
Okay. Well, we'll follow up on that. We'll National Academy of Sciences on that. Again, I want to just say I'm getting the hook here.
I'm going to blame them.
That's okay. No, I just want to say thanks so much for all you're doing. I want to say that this is where the action is in terms of climate, literally right here in San Diego, California. And you may not realize it, but obviously the nation's kind of locked up in politics, Congress. Although President Obama, I think, on this topic has been tremendous. He's been a real leader, and we're very encouraged by what he's done on the power plants and by China, what he's done with China. But California is really leading the country with Prop 32 and SB 375, which is the one that requires local governments to plan for reduction in emissions. And the local leadership here, there's a lot of really interesting, innovative civic participation stuff going on here. You've already been a part of that, but this is a really great place to be if you want to do climate, in addition to having really great science here at Scripps. So we wish you the best. We'll continue to be in touch. I mentioned before, I had Dr. Ram out to Washington, D.C. to brief us. He made the same offer to other faculty members. We'll bring this knowledge and this collaborative culture to Washington, D.C., and we will fix that place. It's the last thing we do. Thanks very much.